This is the Hacking Real Estate Podcast, Season 2, Episode 5.
I think it's important for especially new investors, to get comfortable, right? And I don't mean getting comfortable because there's something called analysis paralysis, right? Where we start obsessing over these numbers and being perfect, right? There's no deal is going to be perfect. What you want, though, is that when you make an offer on a property, that you are confident going to bed that night thinking like, this is the right property. And I always say, like, the goal of the first one is a first base hit, right? We're not looking for a home run on the first one. We want a nice, solid first base hit that's going to get you comfortable, get you experience, and make you confident moving forward. And then we can build off of that.
Welcome to the Hacking Real Estate Podcast, where we dive into the stories of seasoned, hands-on, and tech-savvy real estate investors. We'll learn the strategies and tools they use to maximize returns and minimize hassle, all while navigating the rapidly changing real estate market. I'm your co-host, Brandon Hall, and managing partner of Hall CPA, and I'm sitting alongside my co-host, Vikas Gupta, CEO of Azebo. With our combined 15 years of experience in real estate investing and entrepreneurship, we're here to help you up your real estate game. Let's get hacking.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Hacking Real Estate Podcast. Our guest today is Brie Schmidt. Brie is an accomplished real estate investor who, starting in 2011, amassed a portfolio of nearly 100 units across Chicago and Milwaukee. By 2014, she had fully embraced her passion for real estate, leaving the corporate world to become the managing broker of Second City Real Estate, a top-tier brokerage designed for investors. Since 2020, her firm has sold over $130 million worth of investment properties, and last year they helped clients add over $2 million in rental income. She is also the co-founder of the Midwest Real Estate Networking Summit, a no-pitch learning environment for attendees. She is also a real estate agent coach, teaching agents on how to work best with real estate investor clients. Brie, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. That sounded like a mouthful.
You're an impressive woman. There's a lot going on there.
There is a lot going on there.
So in your own words, tell us a little bit more about the real estate journey and how you started, adding additional. She also sort of, there's, like I said, there's a lot going on there. So tell us how you managed to put it all together.
It's kind of an interesting story. I bought my first property in 2011 with really no intentions of ever buying another one. That was going to be our forever home. So I said my fiance at the time and we were, figuring out what we were going to do with our lives, right? We were going to eventually start a family. In the Chicago market, there's a lot of 2 to 4 unit properties. So our idea was, let's buy a 2 to 4 unit property, rent out the other units. And then as we need more space, we'll deconvert and combine the units and eventually have a single family home. And that was going to be, our forever home. A few months after we bought the property, my father was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer. And we went through 9 rounds of radiation and 13 rounds of chemo. And he ended up passing 9 months later. And it was a very quick, aggressive, year for us. And we had just gotten married. It was 7 weeks after our wedding. And he had died the day before he was supposed to retire. So it was supposed to be his retirement party. And we ended up having to switch it to his wake. And it really shook me to the core, right? He was 60 years old and had always talked about, when I retire, we're going to go do this. And when I retire, we're going to go travel here. And it was always, after you get married and after your brother finishes his PhD, then I'm going to go do all this really cool stuff. And within, 10 months, his whole life, got turned around and he never got to do any of it. And so I sat there in the wake of everything and really thought hell, I'm 28 years old. I've been working in corporate for I think 7 or 8 years at that point. I loved my job, but I traveled a ton. I was working 60 hours a week. I'm I can't do this for the next 30 years. And then for what? For my crappy 2-week vacation that I get to do, I got to figure something else out. And so we had already owned the property for about a year, started figuring out how can we get into real estate investing, bought another property, then another one. The third property was a burr property, if you want to call it. It was an original 1970s home that we renovated, moved in, pulled the equity out of it. And then as I was Googling something, I found this website called biggerpockets.com. And it completely changed my whole entire life because I found a whole network of nerds that like to talk about what I like to talk about. And I was a downward spiral into this community of people. And really went all in. And that was like really the turning point for me. That I was a normal person who could hold normal conversations with people before bigger pockets. And now all I can talk about with my friends is real estate. Like, I don't watch sports anymore. I don't socialize outside of like my little real estate community. But that kind of is what started things. So through bigger pockets, I learned about investing out of state. Decided to do the Milwaukee market and started buying properties there. Very quickly realized that while I thought this was always going to be a side hobby for me, that my day job was now getting in the way of my real estate investing. And that's really where my passion was. So we were doing commercial loans. We were buying 5 properties at the same time. And was it July 2014? I asked my lender if I can quit my job, if it would matter. And he said no. I'm like, great. Put my notice in the next day. Left my job, bought 5 properties a few days later. Then within the next year, I bought 18 more properties, or 18 properties total. Continue to grow there. And then that's kind of the story.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that I saw a post or maybe a series of posts from you maybe earlier this year about how you had offloaded or were currently offloading all your residential property.
Yeah, I sold the majority of my properties in Milwaukee.
What made you do that?
A couple of reasons. So timeline wise, right? 2014, 2015, I bought 18 properties in my own name with my own LLC. And then 2015, 2016, I bought another 10 properties with partners. And then we hadn't bought anything since 2016. So it was actually at a conference through Dave Van Horn. He had the Mid-Atlantic Real Estate Summit, which was, I believe, 2018. And there was the first speaker of the whole entire event was an economist. He got on stage and was saying all these big words I did not understand. Yield curve, inversions, and I was like, I should really learn more about this kind of stuff because I understand my markets and I understand like real estate economics, but I don't understand how like international markets or the bond market, right, is going to affect real estate. And it was something that I wanted to learn more about. So at the end of the conference, the speakers donated their time for charity and it was an auction. So I bid on this economist's time because I wanted to learn more about what he was looking at in economic terms and try to understand that better. Well, part of that process is he had asked me, he's like, well, let's review your portfolio. That's part of the process here. So he had asked me for like all my cash flow, all my analytics, everything. And I just dumped spreadsheets on this guy. And he came back to me with like all these different metrics and numbers. Like I've been very on top of my accounting. I'm really into accounting and data and that sort of things. So I'd always looked at like, how's our quarter doing, right? How's our, year over year? What's our year to date? But I never went back like for years and looked at like, what's our holistic portfolio performance? And he pointed out a lot of things to me, which one of them was some of these properties just aren't performing. Like, why are you keeping these? And when we threw in what the value of the property is and what I could sell it for, some of them, he's like, if you sold this today, you would get 20 years cash flow up front. I'm like, well, then why would I keep that? Why would I keep that property? So that's when I started selling. A couple of them was like in 2018. And then I got pregnant with my daughter and, having a baby is super stressful. So I sold a couple of more and just over from, I think like I started selling in 2019, maybe to 2023. I ended up selling all 18 of my properties. And then 6 of the partner properties also decided to sell. So a lot of that reasoning really came down to when we bought the properties, the appreciation, like we were selling them for almost double what we paid for them. And it just didn't make sense to hold them.
I think I remember this economist.
Yeah, Paul something, I believe his name was.
Because I was at that conference and I was at dinner and he was sitting next to me. And I remember trying to ask him some questions and he basically told me to stop talking to him. I was like, what did I do? Was he like cool to talk to?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
it was very enlightening for me.
I remember him being a super smart guy, but sitting at dinner with him, I was like shocked. I was like, geez, that's good. That's good.
It just brought a different set of eyes on things and really opened up like what to think about, right? Because again, like I'd always looked at, our year over year, our quarterly, and then our, year to date, but I'd never really looked at like the entire performance of the property. You have to understand these are C-class assets. So I definitely learned a lot of lessons dealing with C-class assets. One of the things that still to this day, I don't know like what sort of juju goes on. But like you could have a property being like great for years. You know, I have this property where we had long-term tenants, 4 or 5 years, but then as soon as one goes, the other goes. And like the whole building is vacant for the next, 3 to 4 months. There's a ton of deferred maintenance or long-term capex, and it completely wipes out your cash flow for like a year and a half typically. So when you look at it from like I said, that holistic perspective, like it's a bump in the road. And like luckily I have other properties that can float the portfolio. But when you have the same properties when they're turning over every like 2-3 years and it wipes out a year of cash flow, like it just doesn't make sense to keep them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get that. So when you were liquidating your portfolio, then where were you redeploying cash to?
That's a great question. I didn't, majority of it. I spent a lot of time like researching opportunity zones and 1031s and, going back and forth. And I ended up just taking the tax hit on it. And because I didn't want to feel pressured and I didn't really like any other opportunities. So I have invested in some syndications since, but those were all after tax dollars. This last portfolio that I sold in March, like 48 hours before closing, this property came up in Chicago. It was a mixed use. And it was the first time like I've seen a property like, ooh, I really like this. And I really wanted to go see it. I'm like, I could 1031 and then just, it's going to be a fire trying to get everyone on board to get this done in the next 48 hours. But then I ended up going to see it and didn't really like it. So I just decided to take the tax hit. And then I said I've invested some in the stock market and then some into syndications.
And what are you primarily focused on today?
I'm still, keeping my eyes open for stuff. I've always been a very firm believer in when it feels right, it will feel right, and so I don't really have like a set deployment strategy. I just know that when an opportunity feels right to me, that I will just invest in it.
I know pricing's been pretty tough over the past 18 months or so, and a lot of people are hoping that pricing kind of right sizes over the next 12 to 24 months. So hopefully there's more deployment opportunities coming up in the future here.
Well, right now it's not really pricing, at least so I think it's market specific really. Even when the crash happened, not all markets saw the same loss of equity, right? Hotter markets like Phoenix, Miami, Vegas, right? That went up really, really high, went down really, really low. Markets like Chicago never really went up too high, so we never went down too low. We've been pretty consistent here with our pricing over the last, let's say, 6-7 years. We haven't seen like a very sharp increase, so I don't know if we'll see. And the Bigger Pockets actually has posted an article. I think Chicago had the biggest year-over-year gain, a 5% gain in property values over any other market. So that we're not really seeing too much of a pricing thing. More than anything, it's the rates that are affecting our market right now. I was just doing a analysis for someone. So like last year or 2 years ago, right, November 2021, rates were about 3%. And you were looking at, on a financing, you were looking at about $420 a month for every $100,000 you finance. So a $200,000 loan was going to cost you $840 a month. Now that's $760 a month. So now we're talking, it's like $1,520, I think. So that's a really big difference in payment for the same purchase price. That's what's really affecting our market now.
Explore Azibo for a streamlined approach to property management. Our comprehensive platform simplifies every aspect of managing your rental units. From diverse rent collection methods to finding and securing high-quality tenants through smart applications and thorough screening, Azibo has you covered. Benefit from state-specific digital lease agreements, tailored accounting, tax tools for property owners, and an efficient maintenance request system. Plus, enjoy substantial savings with affordable property insurance tailored to your needs. Embrace the smarter, cost-effective way to manage your rental properties with Azibo. Join our community of savvy property owners and start for free at azibo.com. That's AZIBO.com.
So Brie, in your business as a agent and running a brokerage specializing in selling to investors, how are you coaching them on thinking through the current environment?
It's tough. I mean, there's really two mindsets here. Either A, you're going to sit in the sidelines and wait because you're not comfortable with the way the rates are. Because the reality is nothing's going to cash flow. It's really terrible, even with 25% down. So there was a property listed for let's say it was about $1 million. And it was a solid like 6.25% cap rate, which was pretty good for our market. And he was going to cash flow like $200 a month. So it's like, why would you put $250,000 down to cash flow $200 a month? That's a terrible cash on cash return. So either your options are sit on the sidelines and then see what happens and potentially miss out, or buy now on the cap rate and then hope rates go down and refinance. And, maybe deal with a year or two of minimal to no cash flow. Those are really the only two camps there is. And I would say our clients have been split pretty much 50-50. So we do still have clients buying, but it's definitely about half of what we had before all this started.
Got it. So that sounds like a conversation that I probably couldn't have with many residential agents that specialize in primary home sales or purchases. So if I'm an investor looking for an agent, what should I be looking for in an agent who specializes in selling to investors?
It's a great question. There's a lot of things to look for in an agent. First, what is their level of experience? A lot of the books and the blogs and whatever say that you should always find an agent that invests themselves. I don't necessarily need that to be true. So that's not a really primary focus of mine, but I like to know what their market knowledge is and how they look at things. So my suggestion to people always is, if you're looking at a market, I would find 3 agents that you want to talk to and then tell them, hey, this is my budget. I'm looking to buy $500,000 in this market. Can you show me examples of what you think I should buy and why? And then ask them to show you properties. They don't need to be active properties, right? They can be sold properties or delisted properties or properties they've done like a year ago, and ask to see their numbers, right? Any agent who's an investor agent who knows what they're doing, I've got thousands of spreadsheets of properties that I like. So when someone comes to me and says, I'm looking for this, this, and this, in my head, I'm thinking of a couple of properties that I've either seen or my clients have bought. That would be a great example. I like to send them my analysis and then let's have a discussion about it, right? Let's walk through what the numbers are, right? What kind of CapEx you're looking at, vacancy rates, repairs, what cap rate you're looking at, what cash on cash, and then what your overall cash flow is going to be to make sure that you're realistic with what the market will deliver. Because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that investors have, at least one of the hurdles that I have when people contact me, is they're like, I want this. I'm like, well, that would be awesome. Anyone would want that, right? That's just not realistic though. So I like to show and talk through examples and say, like, this is what you can expect, right? With, let's say, 90 days in the market. If you're looking for a unicorn, right, you might be able to find that kind of stuff, but it might take like once a year, you'll kind of see that come up in the market. Through that exercise with your agent, you'll be able to tell if they're the right agent for you. Are they telling you that, oh, you don't need to run numbers with vacancy, right? These are Class A properties. There's never vacant. They're always going to be vacancy. How their numbers conservative, right? How they, or do they like to sell you sunshine and rainbows? All those things, that whole conversation will let you know if they're the right agent for you or not.
I think that the exercise that you just described those is pretty rare among agents. I mean, I know that at least the agents that I know here in Raleigh, North Carolina, there's very, very few people that are like putting those types of things together for their clients, and probably even fewer that truly understand it from an investor perspective. Yeah. So I guess my question is, how do you find an investor agent?
So before that, you just made an excellent point. I would say even in Chicago, where, let's say, depending on the neighborhood, between 50 and 70% of our housing stock is 2 to 4 unit properties. So they're like, house hacking is a total thing here. I would say there's probably 10 agents in this entire city that know what they're doing when it comes to real estate investors. It really, really, really irks me when a non-investor agent takes on an investor property and starts marketing it with a cap rate, and their cap rate is literally rents minus taxes. That's how they determine cap rate. Like, it irks me so bad, and it makes them look stupid, right? But so finding an investor agent, right? You can find them through your local RIAs. Then through Bigger Pockets has an investor agent listing, through local networking events, Facebook groups, right? Ask for referrals. That's how, like I said, we started our business in 2014. It has been 99% referral based. And we are like 95% investors. because we don't sell sunshine and rainbows, right? This is what we eat, sleep, and breathe day in and day out is investment properties, running numbers, Excels. So that when any client calls me and says, I'm looking for an agent, I typically have a couple of examples that I can show them off the top of my head. Like, this sounds like what you're looking for, and here's the numbers breakdown. So again, if you're dealing with a retail agent who doesn't know investing, it's pretty clear on that initial conversation.
Well, so let's actually talk about that initial conversation, because I imagine, I could be wrong, but I imagine that given the current state of the market and how constrained supply is, and the fact that rates have really put a damper on demand, there's a lot less transaction volume happening. And what could be happening, or what I would imagine would happen, is that an agent that doesn't have any experience with this might all of a sudden have an appetite to try to put something together for investors simply so that they can continue to live themselves, right? So I guess the question is, on that initial conversation, how do you make sure that somebody that calls themselves an investor agent is actually an investor agent? Like, how do you make sure that they actually know what they're talking about, and that they're not just feeding you a cap rate that's, rents minus taxes?
Well, that's a double-edged sword, right? Even a new investor, right, should be able to understand how to calculate a basic cap rate. So again, I would put it on them. Let's just say, as a new investor, you're looking in the Raleigh market. You want to talk to a couple agents who say they're investor agents. Find properties yourself and send them to them. Hey, I like these 3 properties. Can you run numbers for me? And see what they do. Again, if they're coming back with a cap rate of rents minus taxes, they're not the agent for you. So it's a little challenge, right? But it really opens up the conversation so that you have insight to see what their knowledge base is and how they're going to sell you. That's what our job is, right? As an agent, our job is to sell. You don't want to be sold, though, right? You want an agent that is going to explain things to you, right? Like, make sure you're making the right decision. There are a lot of us out there that are like that. It's just a matter of finding them.
On the agent side, how do you know when an investor is serious or not, right? Because I can also imagine that somebody just, and I'm sure that you've run across it, it's like, hey, Brie, can you calculate this? Can you calculate this? And finally it's like, okay, are you going to buy one or what? So how do you, I guess, if you're speaking to somebody that's listening and they're an investor and they're like, I would love to work with an investor agent, but I want to make sure I don't also annoy them, like, where's that line?
So it's a form of balance, right? For me, it comes down to, again, that initial conversation of talking about what your expectations are. So when we call them onboarding calls, when we do our onboarding calls, the first thing I want to know is, what's your budget, what's your location, and what's your ideal property? Tell me those 3 things, right? From that, I try to find 3 examples of properties I think is going to fit what they want. And I do a full analysis breakdown. So a lot of times these are analyses that I've already run before from properties I've already seen. And then I send it to them and we have a conversation. We talk through everything. So again, I always tell them, if you see these 3 properties and you're like, yes, this is something I could buy, the returns are what I'm expecting, and the cash flow is what I'm expecting, then I can help you. But if you look at all 3 of these properties and you say, you know what, the return's not really there for me, I was hoping for a 7% cap rate, then thank you for your time, but that's just not realistic in this market. I can point you in the direction of maybe other markets in the suburbs or further out that may be able to find those sort of cap rates. But at least in the city of Chicago on the north side, you will not find a 7% cap rate. It's impossible. If that's what your minimum criteria is, it's not going to be a good fit, because I'm not going to go chase around a unicorn.
When you give them that analysis back and it meets their criteria, is there a certain expectation that you have for them to pull the trigger on making the investment happen?
No. We've had clients take 2 years to buy property.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had clients take 2 years. We've had clients who have, we had just had a client we looked with for a year and a half, and it's not like we weren't writing offers. We probably wrote, let's say, 7 or 8 offers with them, all over asking price every time we got outbid. And then they decided to just buy a condo, and like, they were pregnant. They were expecting their first baby in January. They've been looking for a year and a half and like, this isn't going to happen for us. Let's just buy a condo. It's like, absolutely, those things happen, right? And life changes. It just really depends. On average, I would say in a normal market with normal inventory, the average client takes about 6 months to buy something. So what we do things a little bit differently here, is that every day, 3 times a day, I get every single MLS listing in my market area. And I've been doing this for 13 years. And every day, 3 times a day, I run numbers on every single property that's come up in the city of Chicago in the last 13 years. I put them through my initial calculator. So we're looking at, obviously we're looking at cap rate as kind of our basis. If it's in a great neighborhood and it was just renovated, right, we know that people will take a lower cap rate. If it's a property that needs a little bit of work, right, or it's in the outskirts of the area that's a main focus, we want to see a higher cap rate. And we send that list to clients and tell them, these are the properties that meet our criteria this week. Let me know which ones you want to go see. So that, like, in the beginning, my job is to teach my clients to run their own numbers and be comfortable. So in the beginning, when I've got a new client, they'll send me a link, hey, what do you think about this? I'll run my numbers on it, and I like to point things out to them that they may not understand or see. So for example, like, we have sometimes wall heaters here. They're from the 1960s. So whenever I see a wall heater, I'll tell them, like, I'll point out, like, hey, if you look at picture 22, you see that wall heater there? That's going to be a $15,000 conversion. And a wall heater is like a hot potato, right? It's been there for 40, 50 years. At some point, it's going to go, and they don't really make them anymore. And you've got to add ducts. You've got to add a central HVAC system. So next time you're looking at photos, look for that. Or look at photo 5, right? You see those gaps in the floor? The floors have been sanded, like you can see the nail holes in the floors, right? Those have been sanded down too much, where now you got to either do a LVT over your hardwood or a new floor replacement. And that's going to cost you $6,000. So that next time they're looking at the photos, they're paying attention to those things, because the average home buyer doesn't look for those things in pictures. So again, in the beginning, like, I'm running my numbers and sending them to the client, but I'm trying to teach them along the way. And then in the middle, right, they'll start sending me stuff and be like, hey, I ran some preliminary numbers. How do you think this is? Or I made sure I saw that you pointed out last time, and that's going to cost me this, or I think market rents are that. So like, then it's more or less like me double checking their work, right? But the whole goal at the end of the day is for me to teach them how to make their own decisions, because I will never talk a client into a property, right? That is not my job. My job is to find the property and to educate you. It is your job to decide if it's the right property for you. And you're the one that needs to sleep at night understanding those things. And if you're not ready to make those offers, that's because you're not ready and you just need some more education.
That sounds like a pretty amazing service that you're providing to your clients.
I love it. And it's so fun for me. I said, it's been 9 years I've been doing this. A lot of my clients are repeat clients. That's one of the benefits of being an investor agent. I just closed on a property with one of my clients. It's his 3rd property in 3 years. He bought $2.4 million of real estate in 3 years. And I talk to him pretty much every other month at minimum for those 3 years. Like, he just had a water leak yesterday. He just texted me yesterday and said, hey, there's some water coming in my kitchen. I'm like, I'll text my plumber and copy you on it. He'll come out today. There's a lot of things that come up in the business, like years down the road. Hey, we got bed bugs for the first time. How do I handle this? Or do you have we have a tenant situation, right? How do I handle this notice? It's like, I've developed friendships with almost a vast majority of my clients. And I always joke, said, Brandon, you have little kids. So I've got one who's a pediatric ER doctor. I've got one who's a pediatrician, one who's an ER doctor, and another one that's a regular ER doctor. So I can rotate when my kids get sick between texting one of the 4 of them. Like, hey, the little one's got this cough. Here's a video. And they're like, and I've been able to get concierge doctor service, right, through old clients of mine that I've developed relationships with. You want to hear a really funny story? Get this. My daughter had an ear infection on a Friday night. I sent a picture to my ER doctor client, who then called me in a prescription to Walgreens. And I was 2 hours went by, I was calling the Walgreens for the prescription. No one was answering. I'm like, I'm not going to go out in the cold and go pick up this prescription if it's not even there. Well, one of my agents is a pharmacist for Walgreens. So I texted him and said, hey, can you look this up in the system? And he's like, yeah, they haven't even started processing yet. But you know what? Like, I'm heading back from my shift. I can fill it for you and drop it off in your mailbox. So not only did I not have to go to the doctor, but I got a prescription dropped in my mailbox at 10 o'clock at night from one of my agents. I'm like, that's parenting, like, next level stuff right there.
That's great. One thing I'm really curious about from as a software guy, data guy. So you're pulling down the listings 3 times a day, you're running the numbers, you're looking at images. Like what technology investments have you made or are you thinking about making to put more automation behind some of these processes?
I don't think you can. There's been a bunch of software programs that have come out. I've done, demos and beta testing over the last couple of years, and I've never found something that is remotely even close to being able to do what I can do visually, right? And again, it comes through experience. So again, 13 years of looking at every single listing on the north side of Chicago. It takes me 3 to 5 minutes tops to run numbers on a property. Right. So I should actually video this. I was meaning to video me doing it one of these days. So our average price point is, let's say, $600,000 to $800,000. If a property comes in the market that's in the high 8, I know that my buyer pool is already going to be pretty small, and that property better not need any work. Because if that property is going to need work, then I know that my buyer pool is maybe 1 or 2 clients, and I'm probably just going to skip running numbers on it because it's not going to be the return that I need. So again, just looking through the listing photos, I could guess real quick based on like what's the size of the bedrooms, right? How many bedrooms, what's the condition, what market rents are going to be. And then I just have an old school Excel spreadsheet. I have an old school Excel spreadsheet that's already completely built out for me, that all I do is put in the purchase price and what the rents are, and it spits out my cap rate. And then from there, like I can see if it's, within reason, right? If it's something that we want to go and potentially see, then I can go do more due diligence on it before I actually send it out to clients. But that initial process, like I can probably analyze, let's say, 50 properties in an hour.
There's this idea that in order to really scale, you have to actually do the things that are not scalable very well, right? So not being able to automate or add software is not necessarily a bad thing. That it might be inefficient compared to other workflows, but it might be the best way to do that one specific task. And doing it that way might ultimately lead to a lot more business, a lot more revenue, a lot more profit. Anyway, I like that you said that, because I think in my world too, I run a CPA firm, and we're always looking at how do we automate, how do we add efficiencies. But there are certain things, especially as it pertains to client relationships, hey, hopping on the phone and talking a client through some major issue that they're experiencing, that's not a scalable thing, right? Somebody has to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to interject there real quick.
And it can't be a chat bot, right? And it can't be a VA. It keeps me in tune with what the market is by doing this, right? So like, for example, there's a website called Rent-A-Meter. I'm sure you've heard of Rent-A-Meter, right? The problem with Rent-A-Meter is I can put in an address and how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, and it spits out this really cool, fancy report, right? But what it doesn't do is it doesn't distinguish between an 800 square foot vintage 2-bedroom and a brand new construction, right? 1,400 square foot 2-bedroom. Those are 2 very different price points. So I find Rent-A-Meter is accurate for, let's say, condo quality and above, average size and above units. You can't, or ARV rents. Rent-A-Meter is great for ARV rents. But if you're looking at like a property that was renovated 10 years ago, that's on the smaller side of average, which we have a lot of those in Chicago too, it's not accurate at all. And if you're going into it thinking like, oh, well, current rents are 1,000 and Rent-A-Meter says I can get 2,000, this is a great deal. You're not looking at why it's so much lower than Rent-A-Meter, right? What it's going to take financially to get there. And if you can get there, because sometimes there's certain quirks about buildings that will always be a problem. So I've got one of my 3 flats, my top floor unit is quirky. It's got a crappy layout. The bedrooms aren't very big, even though it's a 3-bedroom, really it's like a 1.5 bedroom. I've had that building for 12 years. That unit is always my hardest to rent out and always my hardest to get quality tenants. And I've renovated it. I've got brand new floors, brand new kitchen, brand new bath, right? It looks great, but it's a funky layout and it doesn't work for everyone. And that unit will always be my toughest unit. Rent-A-Meter and software programs can't see those things, right? They don't have that market knowledge to know, this is going to be a problem for future tenants. I can't market it as a 3-bedroom because I'll get a bunch of people that want 3 actual bedrooms, and then they'll walk in and see it and be like, no, this doesn't work for us. So that's a waste of my time. Another reason why I don't even do showings without running numbers on properties. Because that's a waste of my time. So it's all like I can create efficiencies that way.
I think a really good takeaway here, listening to you, is you use that current rents are 1,000 and Rent-O-Meter says it's 2,000. And I think that everybody listening to this should realize there are people like Brie who are analyzing every deal in their market 3 times a day, right? And so if you find some major variance like that, where rents are 1,000 and Rent-O-Meter says it's 2,000, before jumping into it thinking that you've got some sweet deal that nobody else has found, I would be asking, why has nobody else bought this deal? We actually do this, something very similar, in when we recruit talent for our CPA firm. Every once in a while, we'll be interviewing somebody. They'll sound great. They've got great experience on their resume. And then they'll say, I want $110,000. But when you look at their resume, when you look at how they interviewed, when you hear their experiences and their stories, it's very clear they're a $170,000 resource. And they're asking for 110. And then you go, well, wait a second, what's going on here? To me, that is a massive red flag. We actually had one earlier this year where we started looking into them and realized they weren't actually a CPA. They were lying about everything, as we discovered. Yeah, it's crazy. But the point is that I think some people would look at that 110K resource and go, man, I don't have to pay you 170. I'll pay you 100. What a great deal. And then all of a sudden, you've just invited a whole slew of problems into your business. So the point being is that, this applies to literally every aspect, I believe, of business and life. This is why I don't trade stocks on a daily basis, because there are people on Wall Street that literally wake up, live, eat, and breathe day trading. So there's just no way that I'm going to beat them, right? It's impossible. But this is a perfect example. You've got rents at 1,000, Rent-O-Meter says it's 2,000. That sounds like a great deal. But is it really? Because Brie analyzes that 3 times a day and she's passed on it 3 times today.
There's a reason. There's a reason. So like technology can only take you so far. There's a lot of ways you can use technology in business, especially with accounting, property management software, right? Leasing out your units, automation, DocuSign, there's all those things. But when it comes to property analysis, I just have not found anything that's remotely close to doing it yourself. I just don't see a way that can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been curious about, some of the new image recognition stuff that's coming out, and can it be trained to flag some of those issues that you talked about, and not necessarily, I always view it as sort of like a funnel in can you use technology and data to flag things to look at that might be interesting or may not be interesting, and then spot check them or dig into them more. But I agree, like ultimately, like the human expertise and the deep, rich knowledge of the market is going to be hard to replace with, or impossible to replace with, technology today. And who knows, 20 years from now. But certainly, like, there's a reason that I also eyeball every single dashboard metric that's going on in our company every day, as opposed to relying on someone just telling me what happened. And it's because you have that intuitive sense, right? Of hey, like what's going on here, and that you just build after 20 years of experience, or 15 years of experience, or 10 years of experience.
So I'll launch right into a rant off this topic. It's like what you just described, right, is essentially the 1% rule, which is I'm going to hand quote that, air quote. The 1% rule gets toted around sometimes and misunderstood that is a metric that you should buy on. And it is absolutely not a metric you should buy on. The 1% rule has zero relevance in real estate investing, right? So you can have, I always say example, in Chicago, we've got some properties with boiler heat where the landlord, there's one boiler for the whole building, landlord pays heat, right? So if you're looking at a property and it meets the 1% rule, but you're not seeing that there's a $300 a month gas bill because it's got boiler heat, right? That's going to reduce your cash flow versus a property that has individual HVAC, right? That's a variable that you're not taking into account by thinking the 1% rule actually has relevance. So the 1% rule is meant to be like an eyeball thing, and again, it's not even true in all markets. You can't find the 1% rule in Chicago anymore. We're about 8.8%. But that's a good way of like, hey, this property is within the range. Now I can run deeper details and run numbers on it, right? that would be a great example. But you don't want to just base your whole decision on like, oh, it meets this generic rule. I should go buy this property. It's a good investment, right? It's not a replacement for the form of proper due diligence.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I wish we could keep going because we barely scratched the surface on some of those other areas of your expertise, Brie. But we are coming up on time here, so if you don't mind, we'll go into our 3 standard closing questions.
Sure.
Great. So question number 1, what is your favorite book? And it doesn't have to be real estate related.
My favorite book is a book called Getting Things Done. It's a operational organizational efficiencies book. So I was actually too busy to read the book years ago. So I bought like the Cliff Notes version of it. And it has absolutely changed my life. Again, I run multiple businesses. I'm a mom to 2 small children, and I try to work less than 25 hours a week, which sounds insane. So I'm able to accomplish that by being extremely organized and efficient with my tasks. And that book is the foundation of everything I've been able to do.
Wow. I'll have to check that out. I don't think I've quite cracked the nut the way it seems like you have. Question number 2, what is more important to you in real estate investing, cash flow or appreciation?
That's a really tough question. It depends on a lot of things, right? Your goals and what kind of market you're investing in. So when I started investing in the Chicagoland market, it was, I would say, like a solid B market. Moderate cash flow, right? We were seeing 7% cap rates back then with potential appreciation. And then I started buying in the Milwaukee market, which we were seeing about 9-10% cap rates, but zero appreciation potential. So I liked having the balance of the 2 portfolios. I used to always say that my Chicago portfolio contributes to my long-term wealth gain, and my Milwaukee portfolio contributed to my monthly cash flow. But at the end of the day, when I hired that economist, again, we put in all the numbers, right? My Milwaukee portfolio performed cash flow wise, I believe 3 or 4 times my Chicago portfolio. But when you threw in what the properties were worth nowadays, my almost 30% of my long-term wealth gain came from one of my Chicago properties, just an appreciation over the last couple of years. So it's a balance. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but you definitely don't want to be looking at something that is not going to cash flow with, let's say, rates of 6%. I don't want to say today's rates because nothing's going to cash flow with 8% rates, at least in my market.
Great. I love it. I love the nuanced answer on that one. Final question. Is there any other piece of advice or insight that you'd like to leave with our audience that we did not get a chance to cover today?
I think it's important for especially new investors, to get comfortable, right? And I don't mean getting comfortable because there's something called analysis paralysis, right? Where we start obsessing over these numbers and being perfect, right? There's no deal is going to be perfect. What you want, though, is that when you make an offer on a property, that you are confident going to bed that night thinking like, this is the right property, right? And no agent, right? No one should be able to force you into those sort of situations where you're not comfortable. Again, sometimes it takes a couple of extra months to get there, but that's what your agent should be educating you on, listening to podcasts, right? Reading other people's stories, those sort of things to get comfortable to pull the trigger. And I always say, like, the goal of the first one is a first base hit, right? We're not looking for a home run on the first one. We want a nice, solid first base hit that's going to get you comfortable, get you experience, and make you confident moving forward. And then we can build off of that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Brie. This has been a fantastic episode.
Yeah, thank you.